with our second part of the session for today, with presentation on gender history preservation that underpin a digital handbook compiled by 4 passionate researchers, Hira Azmat and Mahanur Jalal in Lahore, and Tazeen Hussain and Veera Rustamji in Karachi, as part of the Editing Women in the Archives project. This will be followed by the workshop on archiving led by Dr. Madeleine Clements. I invite Dr. Madeleine Clements to share details about the research and archival project and the workshop.
Okay, so hello everyone and welcome. Thank you for coming along this afternoon. Am I okay to make a start now? Yes? Okay, so we're really delighted to have everyone here today for this opportunity to share some of the work that a group of researchers has been doing under the auspices of something called the Pakistan Association of Women Editors and Publishers, or PORPI, collaborative group. So this is some archival work that has been taking place this year in 2024, guided by members of PORPI. So I'll go on just to mention briefly, before I hand over to those researchers to share some of the work that they've been doing in archiving literary and art magazine publications. I'll just share some words briefly about what PORPI is, because I know that many people in the room will not be aware of what that is, what this project is about, and where it's come from. So if we can just move to the next slide for a minute. Yeah? Oh, okay, brilliant. Okay, where do I? Okay. This image on the slide is from a workshop that took place at the Last Word bookshop in Lahore in 2022. So this was just as the pandemic was beginning to kind of recede and enable us to move and travel. It was a workshop that took place bringing together women publishers and editors from Pakistan, and also who were based internationally, because we had a hybrid format. We came together to consider challenges that were faced by Pakistani women publishers and editors to continuing to work on producing literary and art magazine publications in the contemporary climate. And this was a drawing that was produced as an illustration during that workshop. There were actually 8 different drawings trying to capture some of the conversations that were had during that time. Where do I point to move this on? Okay. So there we are, some of us at least, at this workshop in 2022 in Lahore, following which time PORPI was founded as a group to try and kind of continue to support one another, and also to see how we could implement changes that would enable literary and art magazine publications to continue to flourish as well as diversify. So that workshop that had addressed the kind of challenges that were being faced also provided an opportunity to explore solutions to those challenges, which then hopefully PORPI as a group can continue to address in the work that they continue to do. And I should, before I move on, just mention that none of this would have been possible had it not been for a piece of research that was done with me as a nominal supervisor by 2 young women, Maham Khan and Sadia Akhtar, who are at the International University Islamabad. Okay, so I was just mentioning that none of this not the workshop, etc., would not have been possible had it not been for that underlying research that was done by these 2 young women at IIU in Islamabad, Maham Khan and Sadia Akhtar. Maham is currently studying in the US now for a PhD, so she can't be here today. But that work really does deserve recognition. This was interview-based research that they were doing with women publishers and editors to explore the challenges that they faced, which directly fed into the agenda for the workshop. So following that workshop, sorry, I'm finding this really difficult. So how do I move this? Okay. Following that workshop, PORPI was founded in September 2022, the Pakistan Association of Women Publishers and Editors, with aims that were quite wide-ranging, but focused on producing high-quality, high-valuable and accessible publications, being inclusive, striving to work across disparate geographies, identities, economic and other disparities, being willing to support one another, sharing knowledge, training and resources, and being committed, and this is really important to what we're talking about today, committed to documenting the work of women literary editors and publishers, past and present, ensuring it is accessible and visible now and for posterity. Other core aims included taking active steps to nurture the next generation of editors and publishers and continuing to engage in research-related activities in order to better understand our working conditions. So these were those core aims that were identified by PORPI at its outset. Now I move to thinking about what are we doing here today, what are our presenters going to be talking about, and what will form the focus of this afternoon's activities. So, as I've mentioned, over the last nearly a year now, we've been working together with PORPI and particularly with core founding members, Nilofer Farouk and the Karachi Biennale Trust, and Mewish Amin and the Aleph Review, to support some researchers working on a pilot project that is directly related to that core aim of being committed to documenting the work of women literary editors and publishers past and present. So this project has emerged directly from the agenda at that workshop and the priorities that were identified. So this pilot project took place over 4 months in the spring of 2024, from February to May roughly, where we had a task of locating, scanning and documenting what we saw as endangered women's lifestyle, literary and art publications that were considered as a risk of being lost and in need of preservation, were not something not to be done about them. And so Hira Azmat and Manor Jalal, who you'll hear from shortly in Lahore, worked on publications from the Simorgh Women's Resource and Publication Centre, Paper Magazine, and some WOAF Women's Action Forum newsletters. And Tazeen Hussain and Vera Rastomji worked respectively on Nukta Art and She magazine in Karachi. But our journeys ranged from within those city spaces to making international connections, where we discovered that there were archives and repositories as well as local ones. So there's been a kind of mapping exercise that's been done through the research as well. The researchers worked to obtain materials, literary magazines, etc., art magazines, but also to conduct interviews with core members of the editorial and production teams behind those publications, were they available, and alongside that they recorded their own reflections on the process of doing this work. And the aim of doing this work, of kind of documenting this material, and also reflecting on the process of trying to do that work, will lead to two core outcomes. So one is going to be an open access digital handbook covering the material, covering those experiences that they've had on the journey of the research, and the other is going to be a web archive where we can share the documented materials as well as link to others that are available. So the digital handbook that we aim to produce, and we have a draft prepared, but we're hoping that feedback from today's workshop will help us to finalize that document. The digital handbook on archiving that we produce is going to offer advice on understanding the context for archiving in Pakistan as we see it, tips on getting started on an archival journey, identifying material, getting access to it, reflections on the skills that are needed, practical, perhaps interpersonal, methodological, when it comes to doing that kind of work, as well as insights into this very rich research that's been conducted and that has been contextualized by interviews with people involved in the publications. It will also include a directory of useful locations and contacts when it comes to doing archival research in this field of literary and art magazine publications, as well as training resources. But to make sure we're more connected and can grow this work and archive. So feedback from today's event, when we move on to the workshop that follows these presentations, will be really valuable to us in understanding what knowledge you have of archives, repositories, and also what archives, documentary materials and so on, and their preservation means to you, including in your own creative practice, because I know there will be many artists here, many practitioners in various ways. So today's program I had on a slide. I will read it out to you just so that everyone is aware of what's happening. So after I've spoken, I will hand over to our presenters, who are the researchers who've done this work in Lahore and Karachi, to provide brief presentations that give a snapshot of that research and what they found in those very rich archives that they've been producing, as well as their reflections on the process of doing that. And then at about 3:30, we will begin the participatory workshop that we have planned, where we'll break into smaller groups and think about any materials that you might have brought with you and the significance of some of the materials that the individual researchers have found. So we might ask you to choose a group where they're looking at a publication or a publication context that particularly means something to you. We'll hear shortly from the researchers as to what those might be. And then at the Hapaswar, we have a concluding conversation with the writer Tuba Masood Khan, and that will reflect on the importance of records and archives in journalistic and creative practice, as well as providing an end to the day's proceedings. Just to mention also, this is not any kind of installation, but we have some copies, very precious copies of some of the material that we've scanned and documented through the project up here, which you could come and look at the end, but perhaps with careful fingers, should we say. Okay, so that's it from me, and I'm going to hand over to the researchers now, who really have been speaking for and should speak for themselves. So the first, are we not? No. Okay.
I'd just like to interrupt and thank everybody for their patience. We are just doing a switch over between one generator to the other, so it should take another 5 to 6 or max 10 minutes.
Okay.
So, and then we should have the electricity back on.
Okay, so should we wait for that for the presentations?
I think we should wait for the slides.
Okay, so we'll just have a little pause then and wait for that to happen. But thank you very much, everyone.
All right, hi everyone. I'm Vera, and I'm an artist with a research-based practice where most of my projects extract information and ideas from archives that deal with gender and geography. So I was naturally very inclined and interested in this initiative. So She is a publication which has had many lives, many faces, and many personalities. And when I was asked to document and analyze She in February, the first visuals which immediately sucked me in were, of course, these super cool covers, which are in some ways artworks representing or echoing the times they were edited and printed in. But throughout the range of many covers and changing eras, the perennial woman in She is, of course, its founding editor, Zohra Karim, or also known as Zohra Qureshi, who wrote and edited She from 1963 to 2019. Now, while there are some key articles online about Zohra which talk about her as a businesswoman, a student studying international relations at LSE, an editor, a mother, for me, this somewhat larger-than-life figure became quite tangible after interviewing She employees. Their 9-to-5 interactions with her, their many accounts of her, sometimes very good imitations, their love of her style, and most of all, their gratitude towards her, put Zora at the center of understanding what this magazine was about. So over here on this slide, we have the first She briefing on the left, which Zora wrote in 1963, and then we have her last from April 2019. The She briefing was basically Zora's editorial note that would come right after the content page in every She publication. And I think a good way to synopsize Zora was something that 𝐍𝐀𝐄𝐓 had said to me. 𝐍𝐀𝐄𝐓 was a She editor. She joined in 1987. She said, Zora was an all-in-one person, Veera. If there's one thing I learned coming out of She is that if all of us were to leave She the next day, Mrs. Karim would have written, edited, designed, photographed, and published the magazine by herself because she could really do it all. And so while trying to understand who the She woman was, or what did it stand for, I was able to ascertain or answer this question with some reoccurring messages and also some consistent features of very specific women in the magazine. And it became very clear to me that the women behind and in She were significantly resourceful. So Alice Fairs and her two daughters, Salima Hashmi and Maniza Hashmi, for example, didn't just have a lot to say through their art, their plays, and their writing, but essentially coverage on them brought in more readership, more connections, and more networks for She. And on this discussion about resourcefulness and agency of the writers, designers, and editors of She, my research and attempts to archive the 6 decades of She, which obviously meant finding core elements which ran throughout the magazine despite economic highs and lows of Pakistan. And what stayed consistent was She's readers and the Pakistani woman always wanted to have a connection with the outside world. And this increasingly adventurous and open to mind and open to learning about cultural mindset was very much present in She's employees who were fulfilling this need with She's as a printed compass of sorts. And my research has also been very dependent on the physical existence of these copies, which lie with Nahid Yahya, Nabahat Lotia, and Pomi Amina Afzal. And visiting, they like to call themselves the She girls. So in visiting the She girls at their homes, understanding their similarities and interests was what led one conversation to another. And soon enough, I was given an access to a network of She employees. And throughout the eras, these women were not just writers for She, but they were also the models. They brought in the ads, the supplements, and this was also a result of, again, resourcefulness and networks. Here we go. So I managed to transcribe all these interviews and document their creative responses towards trying to keep the magazine relevant. And this is based on another running theme throughout the 6 decades, which is balancing the rebel in She with the consumerist in She. And I've continuously tried to outline this interplay of advocacy alongside flair or glamour in the 105 She magazines I've documented in the 3 outcomes of this project, which are listed on this slide. And over here, I've tried to articulate how I managed to gather information about She from the 60s. As people who were working in the 60s now in Pakistan are very somewhat hard to find, and also once you get to a certain age, you clear out everything in your home. But what I found very interesting is that many highlights from She in the 1960s show up in anniversary issues. There's one red copy over here, if you'd like to flip through very carefully later. So there are many highlights of �she that show up in the anniversary issues or articles within �she from the 70s or the 80s, which look back at Zohra's incentive to empower women through printed discourse, the beginnings of WAF, or profiles on former �she contributors who had at this point of their career grown into other career paths. So really, whether it was the 70s, the 80s, or the 90s, you can see, of course, typography, style, certain elements of the physical magazine change. But again, a common thread remains in terms of the agenda of �she. Articles on the Hudud ordinances, an emphasis on Pakistani art and theatre, articles which focused on how poverty and the lack of labor rights were consistently brought together under this significantly beautifully designed magazine. And so this magazine, quite early on, becomes focused on equipping women, sometimes with how to wear, how to shop, what to say to your husband, how to tell your boss you want to raise. And more importantly, I think �she regularly played a role in educating women about sex, abortions, what are birth control pills, and what are the readers' rights in Pakistan, which emphasizes once again Zohra and her team's effort towards how do we make this magazine a platform for not just us writers, but a platform for the readers themselves. And so �she is also an archival testament. As an artist, I feel that it's an archival testament to look at the handmade production of Pakistani women. These slides are a testament to the creativity of �she's fashion editor, Pommy, and designers such as Nahid and Nabahat. The interviews I conducted with �she employees emphasize these manual modes of assembling and printing in a pre-digital era. And I think this is something that tends to get sidelined because as researchers, we're constantly focused on analyzing the meaning of the printed word. But as you can see here, the attention played on layout, font, responding to folklore and poetry through style, photography, and supporting illustrations are in fact a form of social art history that really take a lot of effort coming together in a pre-Adobe, in an era of pre-Adobe. So while there was a requirement for me to uncover and document articles on Pakistani art in this project, and yes, we have documented all art reviews written by writers such as Madhuri Hussain, we also have had access to some very personal artist studio visits, for instance, with Sherazad Alam and Shakir Ali, over here on the slide you can see. And to me now, in retrospect, the art-related material in �she actually maps the changing scope of galleries in Pakistan. How were our artists displaying? Where were they displaying? Who was sponsoring or financing their work? And by providing consistent coverage on art through the eras, �she can now be seen as a detailed survey of the rise of galleries, art schools, and the changes in late 20th century art from Lahore and Karachi. And the magazine clearly provides equal space to the unheard as well as very popular and famous faces. But there was a lot of content which underlines how the ability to speak and write in English, having access to sites and people to interview, and being in the know-how became determining factors in putting together a very hybrid magazine like �she, which I think sometimes can be very deceptive if you judge the magazine from its cover. So without a doubt, behind a very glitzy page of fashion, you would almost always have an article on the harsh realities Pakistani women have had to face due to a fractured systemic oppression. And so whether it was deciding about what to wear or who to photograph or which male politician needed to be told off, what I found most compelling over the year and over the past few months about �she was that the makers of �she actually enjoyed a lot of power because of their popularity amongst a rising middle class, as well as getting away with a lot of content because they were sometimes dismissed as just another women's magazine. And so I just wanted to conclude with thanking all the women who saw way beyond this misconception, especially to the women who helped me with this project. It was a real joy to participate with them in this collaborative investigative research. Yeah, thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mahnoor. I'm a researcher and a journalist. And for this project, I focused on 2 magazines, which were Paper and the Women's Action Forum newsletters. So, next slide. So Madeline basically elaborated on all of the parameters that were the key focus of our research, but I will talk about the last 2 that played a lot of importance in, as I went through the magazines, they became a focus of mine, which was that what was the political atmosphere at the time the magazine was introduced, and did the magazine, which was led by women, did they get any backlash for the articles that they were publishing? And as I show you some of the pieces, you would understand that, some of them were considered controversial for their time. Next slide. So let's start with Paper magazine. It was founded by Samina Khan and Meher Tareen. It was released between the years 2010 to 2013, and over 9 copies were produced. The magazine was basically marketed as a fashion lifestyle platform, but it also covered social, human rights, art, or literature-related content, and it had a mix of male and female writers. So we picked Paper magazine because Libas dropped out at the last minute, so Nevish and Hira, my researcher, had the Meher Tareen's content, and when I went through some of the articles that she published in her magazine, I thought that, this is the perfect choice. Next slide. So this is a short interview that I held with Meher Tareen. I'm just going to focus on the one small part where I asked her that how did she deal with some of the controversy that her issues caused, and so she told me that they were funding the magazine themselves, so they had the luxury of writing about what they wanted. And so they didn't have to worry about publishers pulling out or anything like that. And the magazine's focus was to give it to focus on something edgy and current, and which was also fashion, but then also was about social commentary or of human rights issues and the things that women like her wanted to talk about. Next slide. So this is something that I elaborated on in the digital handbook, but I'll just give a short note on here. So there were 9 copies in total, and there were various topics that the magazine covered. So in order to categorize all of them in one final order, so I could decide which ones needed to be scanned and which authors to contact. So this is a short Google Doc that I made on each magazine and how I categorized the authors. Next slide. Yes. So why did we choose to archive Paper magazine? So you'll notice that most of the magazines that are over here have an academic tone. So Paper was marketed as a fashion entertainment magazine. It wouldn't have been considered as something that had a serious tones, but the magazine, despite the political era, it was 2010 and we know what was going on, but despite that, the magazine didn't stop speaking about, controversial issues. I have a picture here of the 2012 article that Maheen Ghani wrote for her ex-husband, Shahbaz Taseer, when he was kidnapped. Next slide. And over here, we have a review written by Sanam Taseer on the artwork exhibition that was held to honor her father, Salman Taseer. Next slide. And then in 2012, the issue is here, if you want to check it out. There was a review written on the Ahmadi scientist Abdus Salam. Next slide. So another thing why I wanted to pick Paper magazine was also because it was released at a time sexism in Pakistani media was at an all-time high. The Veena Male controversy, if anyone who's younger than me here, I would encourage you to Google it because it played a pivotal role in what it was like to be a woman in the public sphere. But at the same time this controversy is happening, the magazine chooses to publish this front cover. Please, previous slide. Sorry. this front cover picture of Misha Shafi when she's heavily pregnant, and along with a quote where she says that I'm not going to hide my pregnancy. So considering this time and the time today where there's a it's considered as a taboo topic, it's pretty impressive they decided to do this. Next slide. And then in the 2012 issue, there was this article about a woman discussing dealing with bipolar disorder. And next slide. And then in the 2013 issue, you had Mehreen Ejaz write something about dealing with street harassment. So for its time, it was pretty progressive, and that's why it was such a monumental piece that it had to be archived. Next slide. So the second issue that I worked on was the Women's Action Forum newsletters. I'll give a short intro to it. The Women's Action Forum was a feminist organization that was set up in response to the Hudood Ordinance laws. It originally comprised of Q Khan, Lala Rukh, Nigar Ahmed, Dr. Neelam Hussain, Khawa Mumtaz, and they set up several chapters across Lahore, Karachi, Islamabad. So the WAF newsletters were set up to deal with the censorship that Zia had imposed on during this era, because print shops weren't allowed to publish feminist newsletters in fear of severe repercussions. So this was basically set up inside their homes, and this was a way to keep their members updated about their policies, as well as the sexist laws that were being passed around this time. And I basically elaborated in my digital handbook about why I chose to work with them. It was because I was dealing with the issue of reaching out to the authors of paper that I wanted a backup, and the Simorg newsletters came up at the right time. I discovered them when I was working as a researcher for another project, and I found them at Simorg, but they were in tattered and torn conditions. But I was happy to discover that there's an archive set up at the WAF website. I've provided a link to it. Next slide. So this was Q Khan, with whom I had a short interview with. Leena Khani provided me with this picture, and I feel like it really encompasses the kind of person she is. So a short intro on her. She's an active feminist and civil rights activist, and she was an original member of WAF, and she's also the founder of ASR. And she's also in the process of archiving the material from ASR with LUMS. Next slide. So this was a short interview that I held with Q Khan, and I'm just going to point out the last part where when I asked her that why did she feel that archiving was so important in this day and age, and she said that WAF and WAF had tried to make several efforts to archive their material, because there was no such a movement or no such organization at the time that was dedicated to preserving feminist history, they had tried to work with the government to set up a feminist museum. It was PPP at the time, but some political issue happened and PMLN came to power, and they completely shut down the idea. So next slide. So why would I choose to archive the WAF newsletters? Because aside from their just serving as a newsletter for the members, it also provided important information about the laws that were being passed at the time. I've included one which is from January 1983, and it's about the lynching of a newborn baby. Next slide. And you can see, like, this one is from June 1982, and they provided updates on all the kind of sexist laws and policies that were being passed at the time and how they were organizing protests against them. Next slide. So, and not just that, but they also provided a platform for women to publish their poems and stories, as you can see from these two. So, and I felt that a newsletter like this should not just be, disappeared away from history. Next slide. So yeah, there were a lot of challenges that came in trying to archive these two projects, because firstly, reaching out to the paper magazine authors was quite hard, because most of them had no email access through which I could reach out to them. And then also, it was quite difficult trying to get Meher's interview, as well as Samina. Meher provided very short answers. I wanted to ask her in detail about the decision to put pregnant Misha on the cover, knowing that it was quite a difficult time, but I could only go with what I was given. So, And the third reason, the conditions of libraries and archives, it's quite all too real right now, you know. And I hope that we can, this talk could actually, you know, start like more projects that would be dedicated to historical preservation and archiving. Then technological limitations. I mean, most of the members of WAF or 𝐶𝐀𝐲 are, you know, the elderly people who do not know how to use the internet, or, you know, there's not a lot of knowledge about how to digitally scan or save historical documents. And I think we should do more work on this. And then, yeah, there's really limited awareness about, you know, the dangers of archive. So I'll just start back at where I was. The challenges doing this project, I left it off at the limited awareness about archiving and feminist history. And one of the ways I encountered this was with the Aurat Foundation newsletters. This was like another thing that I discovered while I was going through the archives, and I really wanted to work with them because the newsletters, they were so detailed. They were released in the 1980s, and they were incredibly detailed about everything that a woman should know, like how to reach out to a lawyer if you're seeking a divorce, how to open up a bank account, how to like everything. But there were a lot of difficulties in reaching out to the founders and in connecting with someone who would give me permission to the archives, because a lot of the copies were missing pages. And so with the time frame that I had and the limited funding, I had to eventually abandon the project. So next slide. So coming to the second point of feminist museum in Pakistan, I want to refer back to what 𝐍𝐀𝐋 Khan said, that she had tried to set up a feminist museum, but it didn't work out. And I just hope that, you know, with these conversations that we're having, we could restart the idea again, because, you know, there's so much, you know, the work that these ladies have done, and, you know, so much of the art that I've seen at Karachi, I really just want it to be, you know, preserved somewhere, you know, for future generations. And yeah, it's important that we can, you know, educate the public about the importance of archiving, and also hold workshops on the importance of, you know, encouraging women to join these fields. You know, we had a conversation with Mehwish yesterday about the difference in Lahore and Karachi art shows, and how Karachi, while, you know, I was at that show, it was more welcoming. You know, anyone could walk in and out, and while Lahore had a more closed off atmosphere. So I just feel like we should have more conversations about encouraging people from different backgrounds, and, you know, stop relying on nepotism or gatekeeping to have more deep conversations about art preservation and history. So thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Tazeen Hussain, and I have a multidisciplinary practice. I am a design educator, and I'm also a media. I have a practice in media. I act. तो जब मुझे नुक्ता आर्ट असाइन हुआ कि मैंने इसको रिसर्च करना है, तो it was a very exciting time for me, because Nukta Art itself is an art and design publication. However, it looks at art and design and culture as the wider remit, and does not only focus on art as what we see in the galleries. The focus of my inquiry was Nukta Art, an English language art, design and culture magazine which published 18 issues from 2005 to 2014. It was the passion project of 4 Karachi-based women, Nilufar Farooq, Romana Hussain, Amra Ali and Sabiha Imani. I was tasked to compile a digital archive of Nukta Art as per predefined theme, the change in the perception of art in Pakistan through the publication. The magazine offers a rich record of art activities of the decade via exhibition and book reviews, profiles of artists and art collectors, and content like photo essays, while stimulating discourse on art through themes of colonization and West-centricism, globalization of art markets and their effects on Pakistani art practice, while revisiting perspectives on art by local scholars. But over and above, it is also about a record of the efforts of these 4 women to create a wider engagement with art through their initiatives like the Anxious Century, which was an art criticism seminar, 1 Mile Square, workshop and exhibitions on the theme of ecology, featured here, and the Faiz Art Prize, a competition which invited artists to engage with Faiz's rich poetry, only recorded in Nukta art. All of these initiatives are only recorded in Nukta art. As I started the task of surveying the contents of the 18 issues, I had anticipated a focus on women and women-related themes. However, the systematic inventory and subsequent interviews with the founders of the Nukta art did not reveal any particular focus on women artists or writers, or a salience of women-oriented concerns and themes. The founders, it seems, were not too concerned with gender representation, but with establishing a critical perspective and discourse around art and culture. They were inclusive in their approach, as Nukta art featured content on theatre, film, music, political cartoons, alongside the traditional and at that time newly emerging forms like neo-miniature and new media. The founders regarded Nukta art as a decolonizing project. In her essay, Amra Ali calls for a South-South dialogue to lead the way to activism and re-engage with the local community in order to address the issue of erasure of memory in the post-colony. Nilufar Farrokh profiles Kohari's journey from the traditional medium of clay to glass and laments that his retrospective at the VM Art Gallery fails to draw the Pakistani audience. She wonders if this is due to the perception of traditional mediums as a moribund practice and not rewarding in the increasingly globalized and commercialized gallery space. Other articles offer insights on the sidelining of sculpture due to religious and socio-political influences and critical readings of local artists such as sculptor Shahid Sajjad and painter Musarrat Mirza. Through the reprinting of writings of local scholars like Mulk Raj Anand, Maryam Habib, and Inayat Hussain, Nukta art connects readers to lesser-known perspectives. In the introduction to A Nation's Art, a reprint of Shahid Sohrawardi's article, they state, "The writings convey the earliest concern on modernity, as well as questions of influence and assimilation, and it is only by reopening these pages of the past that we can make historical linkages to our times." Nukta art also provided the platform for often marginalized diaspora artists like Rashida Ryan and Kohari to connect with local audiences. The Nukta art experience is intrinsically linked to its design sensibility. Its pages were opulent and visually enticing. Typography flowed across spreads, as did the images, binding together theme, text, and visual elements. For Sabiha Imani, the designer behind Nukta art, it was a labor of love. Inside the publications, one can see the many interactions carefully designed to create a tactile engagement for the reader. Foldouts of photo essays, postcards, and subscription cards, bookmarks, etc., all added to the Nukta art experience, and this was my challenge. How closely could I capture the experience for the digital realm, which favors the vertical portrait over the horizontal landscape? Due to the limitations of the software used for scanning, I had to exclude the photo essay and photographic catalogs, including one of the vintage posters of Pakistani films, which was spread opulently across 4 pages. We are the recipients of a doctored history. Archives produced with the consciousness of this can be that political space which offers a counter to state narratives. Volume 4, Erasing Dissident Voices, was a covert response to censorship and its impact on art and society, and featured political cartoonists YL and Fika, who faced censorship during the dictatorship of General Zia. Romana Hussain traces the trajectory of street theater and the resistance, while Atika Ali's profile on the group Tehreek-e-Niswa includes a collection of publicity posters of their plays, featured here. And there are many more in the magazine. The same article also includes a photograph of a backdrop painted by Indian artist M.F. Hussain, especially for the performance of a play, Yahan Se Sheher Ko Dekho, on the theme of sectarian violence sweeping across Karachi at that time. Art at Nukta, the news section, provides a rich source of information on local art activities, seminars on art and art criticism, locally initiated residencies and awards, individuals and institutions in art discourse and publication, and even the theft of a sculpture of Amin Gulji's. Nukta Art was an elite English publication with a limited reach of 1,000 copies at the most. Its readership included local and limited foreign subscribers, artists and art lovers. After it closed its gates, the founders gifted undistributed copies to educational institutions where art students used it to study the works of local artists. Nestled within its pages is a representation of the art scene of Karachi, which might not be the mainstream. However, I feel the question is not whether the digital archive presents a representative picture of the Karachi art scene or not. Whether this initiative of the founders to stimulate critical discourse around art was successful or not. The question we need to be asking is whether the archive offers an account of reality which allows for a possibility of creating an alternative future art practice, a socially engaged, historically contextualized, and creative art practice freed from the shackles of commercial markets and Western influences. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is an organization that was founded in 1985, and it is a Women's Resource and Publication Center. Yeah, it's a Women's Resource and Publication Center, and it also does a lot of field work and focuses on gender. But what I will be focusing on today is its publication wing and publication side of the work. So it's a non-governmental, non-profit feminist activist organization, and it's one of several that was created in response to General Zia's military rule in the 1980s, and particularly it was in response to the promulgation of retrogressive legislation that was introduced during Zia's time and is active to this day in Pakistan. So the organization's focus is on researching and disseminating information that can enable women and men to challenge the dominance of ideas that perpetuate social and economic divisions based on distinctions between genders, class, religion, race, and ethnicity. But of course, the primary focus of CMORC is gender. And it was one of a wave of organizations that were created around the same time, and primarily led by WAF members, the Women's Action Forum that my colleague Mahnoor went into. So given that our area of focus for the purposes of this project was material on art and literature, I wanted to locate and document those particular publications. However, I quickly came to realize that this would be a challenging undertaking given how enmeshed the organization's research and activism work was with their creative productions. There was no clear distinction between the two. And so that was primarily due to the influence of two people who were within 𝐶𝐀𝐓. One was, of course, the founder, Dr. Neelam Hussain, who has a strong academic background in literature, and she's been teaching English literature for several decades in Lahore. The second major influence that shaped these publications was the artist Lala Rukh, who was on the 𝐶𝐀𝐓 board, and she was also one of the founding members of 𝐹. Now I'm going to give you some examples from their publications that have been documented for this project that kind of tread that line between activism and art. So this is basically a printing manual for creating art prints created by Lala Rukh. It's called In Our Own Backyard. It was published in 1987. And while ostensibly it is art focused, the reason for its existence is entirely political. So at that time in Pakistan, what was happening was that local printers were controlled by the government, and they refused to print any material for 𝐹, including their posters or any kind of material to disseminate, because they were considered immoral or anti-state. And so at this time, Lala Rukh started to create and produce all of the protest art and posters herself. And she started to also then hold workshops for other women to be able to do the same. And she then went on to expand that practice to other organizations within South Asia and invite them also to learn how to do the same. Because repression is something that we have in common in South Asia, across the board. And so essentially during the 1980s, she set up these printmaking workshops, and the screen printing manual was devised by Lala Rukh for these workshops, which would eventually take place in the backyard of her Lahore home. So similarly, this is sort of an inverse example. This is called In the Court of Women. It was published in 1995, and ostensibly, again, it is a report on a public tribunal that 𝐶𝐀𝐓 held that focused on violence against women. And so I chose to include it in the materials that I documented for this project, because while it is just a report on a tribunal that was very much about violence and the gender-based violence that women face in Pakistan, it directly led to another project by 𝐶𝐀𝐓, which was the promulgation, it was basically, they organized 25 art therapy workshops across KP and Punjab for participants in this tribunal in order to be able to essentially, as a means of catharsis for all the traumatic stories that had unfolded and come about during this tribunal. So the culmination of these workshops was the Trinjan Quilt project, which was designed to co-create a visual testimony to violence in the lives of Pakistani women. Over the span of a year, 25 panels were made by various groups of women, of whom the youngest child was 5 years old, and the oldest woman was 70. The quilt then traveled to schools, villages, poor urban settlements, affluent homes, and a number of women's conferences around the world. It also traveled to an art fair in Beijing, China. So the quilt book, actually also included in the materials that I archived for this project, is a poetic retelling of many of these stories and an homage to all the women who sewed this quilt together. So 𝐶𝐀𝐓 as an organization is run by Neelam Hussain still, and of course she's in her 80s now. And I realize that I'm in Karachi and many of you may not be familiar with the organization. So it has sort of become so full disclosure, I worked there for a while in my 20s as well. And it is in fact a rite of passage almost for most Pakistani women of a certain background or certain aspirations to go through 𝐶𝐀𝐓 and intern there or work a stint there. And so many of Pakistani women media personalities, actresses, writers, poets have in some way been linked to 𝐶𝐀𝐓. And it's sort of an inside joke about how it is sort of like a factory for a certain type of formidable woman in Pakistan. But of course, Neelam is getting along in the years, and a lot of this work seems to have no successor, really. And so a lot of these publications are not really being actively distributed in Pakistan anymore because there's short on resources and capacity. And so it was important, we felt, for this project to archive those materials for future generations. So as you can see through some of these examples, of which I've only given a few because there are many, many of their publications are in dialogue with each other. So their arts and literature-focused work is rooted in their political activism, and their political activism is often articulated through artistic expression. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just, is this still working? Yeah? I'm just taking a breath here because this project has been something we've been working on so intensely since we originally conceived Poppy. There was the grain of the idea there, and then through particularly my relationship with those founding members, with Mehwish Amin of the Aleph Review and with Nilofer Farouk of the Karachi Biennale Trust Foundation, we've brought this dream of doing some archival work to fruition, but we wouldn't have been able to do it without these amazing researchers that we have on this stage here, who are researchers in one part of their life and many other things in many other parts of their life. So I want to say thank you to them. Honestly, I really am quite in awe of what has been brought together through their presentations today, which is a testament to their extreme hard work, but also to the sort of wide range of material that there is sitting in people's homes, perhaps, usually kind of undiscovered and unremarked on, but that in itself functions as a kind of archive of literary, creative practice, of commentary and critique on social situations, and many, many more things. So this is not the end of today's events by any means, whether you're pleased or daunted to hear that. We will take a little time now for some questions before we also move into the workshop part of today's activities. But before I do that, I just wanted to establish for you what is coming up next. So on the slide, there are some points describing what we will do next. So after we've had our questions and answers discussion, which we really are looking forward to, and will be a chance for you to ask the researchers questions about their individual work, about the concept for the project as a whole, maybe to share something that you know of that you think should be archived. Then we'll move into this part of the afternoon at about 3:30. So, the creative workshop is designed as an opportunity for us all to collectively reflect on the importance of archives and archiving, to think about the importance of that individually and collectively, and also to think about what materials people might have that they're aware of that might be candidates for archiving, what institutions we might know of that might help to support with that kind of work, so that we can pool our knowledge as well and then plough that into what we do next. So what we will do is at 3:30, we'll come back together, and then we will break into small groups with each of the researchers, with Hira, with Vera, with Manur, with Tazeen, where that we will have an opportunity. They have some prompts for the discussion to do that reflective work that I've been describing, and think about also what creative use people might be making of archives in their own creative practice. At the end of that session, there'll be an opportunity to share what those groups have been discussing and finding together. And then we will end the day with a half hour of conversation, and again, opportunity to ask questions with Tuba Masood Khan, who is coming to speak to us about her work as a journalist and as a writer, and particularly the way that she's drawn on documentary evidence, archival sources in her own writing work. So that's the shape of the afternoon, and we hope to conclude at about 5 o'clock. Now I'm going to try and just reformulate our group so that we can collectively take some questions from you. So thank you very much, and we'll be back in a minute.
Are there any questions?
Hi.
Mic work? Okay. Yeah.
Thank you all for those exciting set of presentations. I'm Sabah. I'm a PhD scholar at University of Cambridge, Department of Geography. And in some of my work, I'm also looking at archives about the city and water. One question I had from each one of you was about why did you choose, in terms of the magazines that you chose, I'm sure you've given us a kind of a rationale to it, but in terms of like understanding the broader changes that were taking place in the Pakistani society from 60s until the 80s, so Urdu magazines and Urdu as a form of, for the wider kind of population and the masses, right? So I just wanted to understand whether choosing Urdu magazines were in your realm or whether you think that is also an important way, and how did you go about with that?
Somebody can take that. Yeah, I think you created the parameters.
Okay. Is that working? Yeah. Okay, so yes, that's a really important question. And as we were doing the research, the names of Urdu magazines did come up in the process of doing it. In fact, we even discovered something we hadn't been aware of, which was that She magazine had an Urdu edition in the 80s, which ran for a short time. So we are aware of these. I think the parameters of... we began initially with those English language publications, I think as a result of the fact that the Porpy group were largely publishing in English. And so first of all, we were particularly conscious of certain magazines that were in English that we wanted to look at. Initially Libas, although that didn't work out, and also She. So although this is a project that has been funded by an academic, by a university, the research was perhaps not the pure research that you might want to initially undertake had you everything at your fingertips and you could choose what was exactly the measured and the appropriate thing to do. It was dictated by an awareness that someone there has got a collection of these that we need to do something with. And that was the case with She, with Libas that didn't work out initially, with Simor and so on. So we were driven by sort of necessity as well as accessibility. But one of the aims of the digital handbook we're producing is to reflect on that process of doing the archival research, including there are sections, for example, particularly Tazeen has been important in this, but others as well, reflecting on the biases that we have when we bring to the act of archiving that dictate what we include and what we don't. And certainly it is our aim and our ambition to expand, to cover, or through collective or through networking to expand our archive to cover other materials in Urdu and also in other languages as well. But we had to start small and somewhere, which is what we've done. But that's why we're also very interested to hear from people here today about publications where they know some archival work has been done or nothing has been done, and how can we connect those things up. Did some of you want to speak to that question? Yeah.
So definitely I think that, is this close enough? Okay. So I think that's a great question, and I think that Urdu publications, there have been some really kind of major ones, right, in Pakistan's history. And yeah, I think a lot of us, all of us, or some of us did have suggested to the, to Madeline that, we should expand it to other languages beyond just English. But I think, yeah, the constraints were very practical. It was very much about proximity and access. It was very much about, what are we most equipped to handle as researchers? And also, of course, like timeline, funding, and so on. Those very boring practical considerations.
If I could add, because I was also involved in the whole process, we did look at art, because it was going to eventually be presented at the Karachi Art Biennale. So we did look at art, as some of the magazines that did have either writings on art from the 60s onward and how they developed. And of course, Nuqta Art itself dedicated to visual arts. And then also Simurg, because Lara Rukh's contribution to that, publishing house was tremendous. Paper magazine is, kind of a different magazine, but I think it has its own value, the way it was being projected. So I think art, covering art and its connection with art was also a consideration. But then in my conversations with Tazeen, we talked about Akhbar-e-Jahan, which is something, Akhbar-e-Jahan and, Akhbar-e-Khawateen. Those two ran parallel to She magazine. And a lot of the activists in WAF came from these two, quite a few of them. So there is this network out there that was taking out Urdu magazines and, of course, the English ones. So there are a lot of connections out there.
I think Nuqta ke andar to they have also translated some of the texts from Urdu into English. And I think that is their, it shows their commitment towards bringing those texts. We do live in a city and a country which is polarized by language. I mean, our understanding of Urdu is weak. मैं इस वक्त बोल रही हूँ खुद English में and feeling ashamed कि मैं नहीं उर्दू समझ सकती. I cannot engage with that text. So I think the commitment to bridging those boundaries, perhaps by translations, has been there. But yes, there are writings by Shafi Aqil particularly that we encountered. His book is also reviewed by Nuqta Art, and the Urdu publications are here. They have been republished by Baziyaft Academy, and it's a set of 5 books on his writings about art.
Yeah. I just wanted to add, I'm Amra. So as editors of Nuqta, we were very aware of this polarity in language, and that in itself is a problem, a condition that we have wanted to address. And the Shafi Aqil article by Saklan Zaidi in Nuqta was published in Urdu, as were some others in Urdu. And it was, we really wanted to, but I think we also had limitations, but that would have been the next step.
Hello. Have you digitized the content of these magazines, and where is it going to be available for researchers or the general public?
The answer is yes, although there was some selection that took place in terms of selecting articles to prioritize for digitization in the case of some, not all of the publications. I think Hira's ones from Simurg, they were done in their entirety, whereas others, if you've got a stash of, we didn't get access to the whole of the run of copies of She, for example, from the 60s to 2019, but Vera got hold of a considerable number, so it was a case then of selecting some particular material and leaving out others, although that was a challenge, and that's reflected on in the handbook. So, so the digitization is not necessarily cover to cover, but hopefully gives, preserves a lot and gives a strong overview of what the contents of those publications. In terms of where this will be available, the plan is to be able to connect with a digital, with a website that provides access to this digital archive, both from the Aleph Review website and from the Karachi Biennale Trust. But this is the development of those web pages, that digital archive. That is the next phase of the project. So that's something that we'll be working on after we all have gathered ourselves after today, and carrying forward. But again, as I've tried to stress, one of the things that's happened in the process of doing this project is for us to become aware of where there are archives that exist that have, say, a selection of those materials. For me, particularly, because I come from the UK, I was amazed to discover through a blog that was written by Gillian Murphy, who is an archivist at the LSE, London School of Economics Women's Library, that they have a small run of 𝐋𝐈𝐁, which is about 7 copies in the 1980s, that sits, 70s, that sits in, or some from the 70s and some from the, 70s, sorry. But they have actually digitized all of those. So we can link from our website to there and bring those materials together. So we're not repeating labour that's already been conducted, but drawing it together. But today in the workshop, there's a postcard that we're asking you to provide some feedback on the project to, and you can put down your name and your email address there, and then we will get in touch with you as soon as these things are available. The kind of preview of the research will come when the digital handbook is published, which, as I said, combines those insights into the research conducted with the reflections on, and the sort of our kind of reflections on the process of doing the work, and will contain this directory at the end that shares what we've discovered about where certain materials are located and so on. So we're aiming to be as open and inclusive as we can while we recognise the limitations of the project thus far. Anyone else? Oh, lots of people.
Hi, my name's Zehra. I really enjoyed the session. My question's for Veera and the 𝐋𝐈 magazine, your research. What was the sense you got when you saw this whole kind of, over the decades, what was kind of the changing face of the response and as well as the content that was being put out?
Yeah, there's definitely a very apparent changing face, quite literally, from the cover. Even if you remember the first slide, you can see that towards the late 2000s, she does become a lifestyle magazine. There's no doubt about it. I did not manage to get access, so I'll go era by era, and we can have a larger conversation about that, because actually your question is quite on point. Because of the changes decade by decade, that's how I chose to respond. Writing about it was mainly doing it 10 years, 10 years, 10 years. And so I never got to see a physical copy of the 60s, but like I said, I was able to extract information about the 60s 𝐋𝐈 from later editions. And basically in the beginning, we have to take a little bit of a step back and understand why this magazine was so important in a pre-digital era. Women didn't have the ability to go onto Google and say, help me. So really, 𝐋𝐈 in the 60s and 70s is that answer. I found articles about how to change your tire, some very practical advice. And then at the same time, in the 70s, by the way, she stopped printing in 1972 or in 1973, because after the war, there was a big lack of resources and Zora couldn't afford to print the magazine anymore. And in fact, there was a lot more openness, and it was almost like the 70s, 𝐋𝐈 was almost like a chat room, especially in the feedback pages where readers would say, I don't appreciate how your magazine has become in such few pages, why isn't there more content? Or you would have people who were interviewed for 𝐋𝐈 in the 70s who would write back and say, that's not what I said, or you've misquoted me, which is really good, because it means that both the editors and the readers felt that this was a democratic forum to say, I disagree. And then in the 80s, of course, things really hit the fan once 𝐍𝐀𝐃 comes onto the stage, and every single 𝐋𝐈, there is something about Hudud ordinances, and there's a big siding with Benazir once she comes onto the scene on a more public platform. So it gets a lot of political discourse in the 80s. And then in the 90s, we didn't get that many issues, but I knew a Parsi lady her name was Parveez Masani. She lives in Dubai, and she was photographing 𝐋𝐈 and sending from the 90s and the early 2000s, and she was sending me whatever copies that she had. And in some ways, the 90s really does represent the 90s, because I think at that point, Zohra Karim also took a step back, and her daughter took more of an active role in redesigning and remodeling She a little bit. And very much so globally, how supermodels became a really big item in the 90s. It becomes a very big feature in the 90s in Pakistan as well. So some global alignments as well with, international changes in women's-led magazines. But I will say something, that she is consistently quite popular. And that's also something that all the She employees acknowledged throughout the decades, that she had a good readership. And it's getting back to your question about Urdu versus English, as just as important as Urdu written publications are, it's also important to understand that we do live in a post-colonial country, and many women continuously strove to read and write and engage in English, and she provided that platform through the English language throughout those 6 decades. So it was definitely aspirational, and they weren't ashamed of it. Zohra was a lot of people, you can interpret the word progressive however you like, but she is very adamant on the fact that women should say what they want to say. They shouldn't feel shy about it, and they should embrace the fact that they're not just Pakistani women, they're women of the world. So those are some commonalities and some changes. And yes, it does become quite fashion heavy, quite lifestyle event, like going to events, photographing beautiful women in front of logos and stuff towards the late 2000s. Yes, that does become the magazine towards the late 2000s.
So I'm Elise. I'm a social sciences student at IB, and first of all, just thank you for all of the research that you've put into this. It's been extremely relevant and poignant in our day and age. And the question I wanted to ask is somewhat similar to what was just asked and what you just covered, but considering how this is the era of internet feminism, the fourth wave, and all the ideologies and opinions that have been emerging nowadays, what was the exact narrative that may have pushed you to consider this archival project for itself?
Are you asking why we chose these magazines? Why?
Why? Yes, exactly.
Well, I think Madeline also covered this. We kind of had to work with what we had. So when I was actually interviewing for the job, I was already told that it's either She or Nukta, and because I have an art background, I was like, give me anything but art, because I'm sick of it. So I wanted to do She, and I was pleasantly surprised that She includes a heavy amount of art-related content. But something not directly related to your question, but I'll give you a little bit of a story. There's one article in the 1980s about a female politician. Her name is Nisar Fatima. And she was aligned with Jamaat-e-Islami, and you're talking about, what were the voices of feminism pre-digital era. And so how today with Aurat March or with so many feminists who are active on digital forums, they get spammed and they get so much hate. It's interesting that Kawar Mumtaz wrote this article. Because Nisar Fatma, from what I understood from that article, she was that antagonist, who stays up all night trying to figure out how do I bring down these women trying to talk about women's rights. And they do a whole article about her when they're discussing, okay, what is your problem? Like, why do you object to every single thing WAF brings forward? And she brings forward very much the exact same responses that a lot of women have to deal with today, that, oh, in religion, women already have rights. So why are you screaming and yelling? Why are you making a scene? You already have these rights according to the tenets of religion. So in some ways, the content of what these magazines are printing in terms of women's rights and why they deserve them, the fight is not any different in a digital era.
So this happened way before I joined the project, but I think one of the things that Mehvesh, Nilofer, and Madeline talked about with us was that when they would get together as women publishers and editors, one of the things they talked about was that there is no documented history of women-led publications in Pakistan. So when people are, sort of in terms of, there has to be a sense of history for there to be a future, right? And so the idea is to kind of inspire, A, document that very rich history, first of all, and then B, so that women now and in the future can look at this legacy and be like, we are just one of many. And we are like one in a line of women who have done this and been doing this since the country was created, right? So because so much of this work happens in silos, like creative practice and publications and the publishing industry as it is, I mean, truncated and sort of small as it is, all of these things happen in silos, and so there's no dialogue and there's no collaboration, so there's no kind of integrated kind of narrative or history there. And so and we reflect on this a lot in the digital handbook, but essentially what we meant to do as a group was not any kind of comprehensive, sweeping kind of research, archival research, but I mean, we are very aware that because of a lack of, because of like the constraints on resources and such, and as well as capacity, what our work is just a drop in the ocean, and it is just a beginning. We want to basically start that work. And also acknowledge that other people are also doing that work, where we, for example, we highlighted Nighat Saeed Khan working with LUMS on a women's archive of Pakistan. And that is something that LUMS is doing in Lahore, for example, where they're also reaching out to other women's organizations that want to document that history. And so, yeah, so the idea is to kind of inspire other projects to do sort of similar things and to kind of bring all that history together.
Also, it was interesting when I was looking at contemporary art publications, नुक्ता की, तो मैंने उस वक्त 4 देखी और उनमें से 3 जो थी वो women led थी. तो ये भी एक इंटरेस्टिंग बात थी कि आर्ट के बारे में ख़वातीन ही क्यों ये मैगज़ीन्स निकाल रही हैं, ऑल्सो नोइंग दैट दे आर नॉट कमर्शियली वायबल और lucrative at all, they're not making them any money. And then in my interviews with the founders, it was really interesting to see how these women with their own ideals and the way they looked at art, it was very much a passion project. It was not about कि ये इनको पैसे बना के देगा, कहीं से पैसे नहीं बन रहे थे, बिल्कुल पैसे नहीं बन रहे थे. They spoke about how Amra's kitchen table used to be the space where they used to sit and talk about the next issue. The cars going to pick up everybody's kids, and the issue just happening in between, and Sabia putting in nighters at the printing, because Nukta was a high quality print publication. If you look at its printing in comparison to the other art publications of that time, you realize that that cost of print which they bore also had a big link with the fact that it has still survived and it's in good condition right now, but it needs to be preserved. So I think us tarah se bhi it's a very interesting thing to think about, what were they getting out of it, So
to answer your question, I work as a journalist, and a lot of my work revolves around feminist activism and movements like Aurat March, and a lot of like the current environment that we're seeing right now, कि जिस तरह से suppression हो रही है. So when I joined this project, पहली चीज़ तो मैंने मैडम और महवेश को बोली थी कि हमने बहुत ज़्यादा hurdles देखने हैं आगे जाकर, क्योंकि this is like common in Pakistan कि publication cease to work with us, कोई last minute interruptions होती, cancellations होती हैं. So, but when I started working with paper, I saw like there was so much that this magazine had to offer in a very restrictive time. But the thing that they had was that they had money on their side. Like Meher said, we didn't have a problem with the money, but I just want this is, I like Hira said, this is a drop in the ocean, and I just hope कि हम आगे workshops करवाएं. Women like Meher come forward, and we can also hold workshops where we can talk about how can we provide funding to women who want to join this field, and who are even from like different backgrounds and different languages. So we can actually expand on this and build a bigger archive. Because abhi se hi I know there are other newsletters out there in Urdu and in Sindhi, but I don't want them to wash away in history.
All right. quick question. My name is Rafi Ahmed. I teach at Indus Valley. And in the past year, I was teaching this small segment on women and space. And the information that I got today it's in the absence of a consolidated document on feminist issues, women's issues in Pakistan. I think these small archives, specifically the women's actions, the WAF papers and Seymour, which seems from what you guys presented like a more like real life issues as opposed to other magazines that are perhaps more about lifestyle issues. The question that I have is that first of all, some of these magazines, have they gone online? First of all, why were they, I understand most of these are like passion projects. So, why did they end? Because, all of them, the ones that you guys have presented today, don't exist in paper format anymore. The question is, do they exist in a digital format? And specifically Nukta Art, I was just wondering, as a passion project, why did it have to end? Why can't it continue in spite of the fact that it's not making any money?
The answer is no. I think Nilofer and, yeah.
ये तो आपने दुखती रग पे हाथ रखा है. So, going back to the last question, I think when you're talking about the passion project, it was not just that we were very passionate and we wanted to do an art magazine. There was a real need we felt, and I think Nilofer would agree, that there was a lack of issue-based writing, to looking at the context and to looking at the context of South Asia, of local context, histories, and those trajectories, because we felt that global markets were just beginning in art, and we felt that we needed to not have this, big word appropriation. So I think that was one of the reasons why we started, not because we were women and we were, passionate about writing. We were, but we felt that we needed to expand the discourse. The other thing was, it was my dining table, not my kitchen table, because we didn't have time to cook in those days. And the other, about archiving, we did have a website which got closed. We closed, and we had a lot of hurdles. But there is still Factivia, which did take our publications and put them online. So you have to go and buy from Factivia. So most of the issues were there. And I think we will at some point bring it all together online as well.
Sorry to interrupt this beautiful discourse. They're switching back onto the main line, so we need to take a break.
Okay. Well, may I just say one word before we do, which is to thank everyone. And if there's anyone I haven't thanked, all the KB team, everyone, Nilofer, Mewish, the researchers, and I guess Teesside University for providing me with the funds. Thank you to everyone and for being here as well. So we'll come back with the creative workshop just in a couple of moments when we switch to the other generator or whatever we need to do. So just breathe for a minute, I think. Okay. Second, and we will restart with the workshop in just a minute, so you can keep your tea. So it's been really wonderful through the discussion that followed the presentations and also just the conversation over tea to discover what a stake so many people here have in what we're trying to achieve. So this is our chance now to explore your stake in it further, but also for us to gather some feedback, some really important insights into what for you is important about archives, as well as I've said, where there may be sources of information or materials that you think should be prioritized for archiving. And all of this we will take back with us as we proceed to finalize the digital handbook, think about our next steps, the web archive that we're creating, and so on. So the plan for the next part of the day Maybe we're a little bit shorter on time, so maybe we'll spend about half an hour on this, and then we'll move on to our discussion with Tuba, who is here, and I've seen, maybe she's gone to get a cup of tea. So anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to collectively consider the value and importance of archives. You're invited to reflect on an artifact. That might be a photo, a letter, a magazine, or any other small item or large item. It might be a film, it might be something else that you see as precious and important to preserve. Some people may have brought something with them. You might want to think about what you have in your own homes. The researchers individually are going to break off and lead 4 groups. So what we will invite you to do is to go and sit with maybe the researcher who's worked on something that has a particular meaning or significance for you. And then they have a few prompts for you as to things you might think about while we're reflecting on this. And then we'll come back together at the end and share what we found. But do please, there is a postcard that we've created. On the back, it has an area for you to use to record any thoughts that you have during that discussion that we're going to have now. And also, please, to share some feedback with us so that we can take this project forward in the best ways possible. And my contact details too are on this postcard somewhere. Yes, in the top corner here. So I'm Madeline Clements. Please do send me an email if you'd like us to keep in touch about the project as well, or put your name and email address on the feedback forms. Leave them at the door, and then I will be able to get in touch with you as well on behalf of us all. Okay, so we are going to break into groups at this point. If you have a particular publication that you were interested in, we've also got a handout relating to each on the stage here that you might want to pick up. So I hope that's clear, but if you have any questions, please do ask the person who you go and sit with, and they'll be able to help you. And then we'll come back together at about 4:25, something like that. Okay. To end the day, this was Hira's idea, so I'm not claiming responsibility for this. Well, maybe it was a collective decision, but we thought it would be really nice to end the day by having a conversation with someone who was making, we're calling it creative use of archives in their practice. Maybe you wouldn't quite call what you're doing a creative use, but certainly looking back to documentary evidence and archives in a variety of forms, and then using that to create either an artwork or, in the case of Tuba, a book and a podcast that draws on that material and brings it to life for readers today. So I'm going to very briefly introduce Tuba, who has got lots of wonderful experience that I'm probably not going to be able to do justice to now. But Tuba Masood Khan, you may know for Notes on a Scandal, the podcast that she's created with Sabah Imtiaz. She's a communication specialist and freelance journalist who is based in Karachi, and she's worked for a number of news and media organizations in Pakistan. Her reports have been featured in the BBC, on Dawn, Huffington Post, India, Sama, etc. She's also worked with Al Jazeera, the LA Times, and her writing ranges from covering elections, documenting Karachi's history and building regulations, and long-form work, including writing on sexual harassment in the workplace and women's health. And she was shortlisted for the Zeenat Haroon Rashid Writing Prize in 2020. I mentioned Notes on a Scandal, which is her true crime podcast taking a particular case that I will hear a little bit more about today from history and bringing it alive, which has led to Society Girl, which is, you've got a copy somewhere?
I do have a copy.
Yeah.
It's there.
Okay. So welcome, Tuba, and
Thank you.
yeah, it's great to have you here. So I've mentioned a bit about what has emerged from the audience today following those discussions about archives and so on, and it's clear the importance they have to people here. And what's emerged through the discussions that we've had today, but also through the Biennale conversations over the discursive weekend, and also through the artworks that we've been looking at in the Biennale, is that creative work functions itself as an archive and as a repository of all kinds of stories and histories, often that are forgotten or marginalized. So it works in that way, and it draws, but at the same time, it draws on archives, etc. So it's sort of, it both records and preserves it, but it also, as yours does, draws on those archives. So I wanted to ask you, what were the origins of your true crime book, Society Girl, and yeah, where was the starting point for that?
Sure. So I think for me and my co-author Sabah, the starting point was very different. For me, my father had just passed away, and a friend of his had mentioned that his case and this other case in the 70s had a similar storyline. So obviously I was very intrigued, and I used to work at Dawn in those days, so I immediately went to the library and I started looking up the case, and I read about the case. Sabah and I had worked at the Express Tribune earlier, which is where Sabah first came across the story in the AP archives, and we were both talking about it. She was there researching something else, and we were like, oh, if we ever work together on a story, it has to be the Mustafa Zaidi story. And that is how it started. So it started off with just going through the Dawn archives, the Star archives, and then it just, 5 years later, there's a book. 3 years after that, after we started researching, we had a podcast. But there was so much, and a lot of it actually came from the archives. And then we had our own timeline, which Sabah and I spent excruciating hours on, just trying to put it together. But we essentially just had the archives to work with. And then we got interviews, and then we got court documents and such. So that's how we actually built it up. And whatever we got later, like the court documents, the FIR, the autopsy report, all of that was essentially backing up what we'd read in the archives.
Sorry, not everybody here may know what the Mustafa Zaidi story is, so it'd be great to have some context.
Sorry, I assume because I have been doing this for 5 years that everybody knows.
Into Mustafa Zaidi's story.
Yes. I assume that everyone is aware of this obsession. So basically, in 1970, October 1970, a man was found dead in KDA scheme, in a house in KDA scheme 1. That man was Mustafa Zaidi, who was a poet and a civil servant. His married lover at the time was found unconscious in a room next to his room. And that is where our story starts, because it was all about, Saba and I actually worked backwards, if it makes sense, from the day of the death to finding out what happened, who were these people. And we actually got really interested in what was society like, what was going on, what was Karachi like. And the archives actually really helped us paint a picture of that. So we didn't just look at news coverage, we looked at different magazines. So we looked at Herald. Herald used to have these social pages, what's happening on New Year's, what's happening at parties. There was a party at Beach Luxury where everyone dressed up like they were in a jungle. So someone was there wearing a Tarzan outfit. There were parties and cabarets at the Metropole, which we also got photos of. We got to see that. We got to speak to people who used to work there about what it was like, the discotheques. Similarly, we also went and got archives of the Mirror, which were also really fascinating because they covered East and West Pakistan. What was going on? There was something called the Dhaka Diaries. There was what's happening in Karachi nightlife. We interviewed someone who said that she went to a dinner where Fatma Jinnah was there, and Fatma Jinnah was like, "Oh, you're still here. I haven't seen photos of you in the Mirror in so long, I thought you were dead." So, there were things like that which we found, which is really interesting, and which we wouldn't have actually come across if the archives weren't there. But obviously finding these archives was very, very difficult because we didn't know where to look.
So I wondered if you can just say a little bit more about what those specific archives were, because there was a range of different types of archive, weren't there? And also that question of how do you know where to look and where to get started, which is something we've also kind of thought about and addressed through the digital handbook too, although piecemeal in the sense of everyone's got a different journey on and a different circle to draw on, perhaps, to make this connection.
Sure. So because I was at Dawn and that was the most easily accessible library to us at the time, that is where we started off. So from there we actually came to Liaquat National Library, which also has a really good collection, and Saba and I got aggravated allergies because after turning page by page our hands turned dark. We went there, we went to Bedil, which was also one of the best libraries that I've seen in the city. The librarian was excellent. We also went to the Sindh archives. Then we went to Lahore. In Lahore, I think the best archives we went to was the Punjab Public Library. I mean, the collection that they have and how helpful they are. I mean, we would go every day and we were just like, I don't know what we're going to find today. And the librarians knew exactly what we needed, where it was. Acha, aapko ye isme milega, ye yahan pe hoga. And they were so nice. They would scan everything, and I loved them. And then I was in Islamabad, so I went to the National Archives and the library over there. The library didn't have that much stuff, but the archives, the National Archives, were interesting. So you need to go there, you pay 25 rupees to register, but you need to know exactly what you're looking for. So you need to know the name of the publication, the year, and the month, because they keep everything underground in temperature control rooms. That was the only place where I found that. Actually, it's also at the Sindh archives, but let's not get into that. But yeah.
Yeah, I also went to the Punjab Public Library. What a stunning building. I don't know if you guys if anybody has been there, but it's basically almost like if you've been to Lahore Fort, it just looks a lot like that in its architecture. And so it's kind of fascinating to find this really, really old, stunning Mughal era building, which is fully functioning with a library and offices. And so imagine
and space to nap.
Yeah, space to nap. There are some serious serial nappers there as well. But yeah, essentially, imagine if the Lahore Fort was like a functional building. That's the sort of vibe that place has. But yeah, very, very nice stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, it was such a blessing to actually go to an archive or a library where people knew where things were. And
we're interested in helping
and we're interested, right? So once we were done with the book, we had to just to check with everyone if they're okay with us using their archives. We called them and they were like, yeah, we know you guys. It's totally cool. And I was like, wow, thanks. It was just really nice.
It's interesting also because it's something we haven't talked about today, but will somehow go into the digital handbook in some way, is this question of kind of obtaining consent and permissions, and what do you need to do about that? What do you need to know about kind of copyright, or if it's a case of placing material online, but also consent for interviews and so on, which are those kind of concerns that can then sort of hold up what is the perfect archival project in many ways. So it's brilliant to know that people were so supportive as well. I mean, I think a question does arise too when you say you need to know how to look, where to look. How do you do that? If there's some kind of digital catalogue, you could research in advance, but otherwise it's anecdotal, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there was a point where Sabha and I Googled libraries in Karachi. and that's how we actually started our short list of where we can go, what we can do. There were a lot of places we actually didn't end up going because we either didn't get permission or it wasn't working out. Logistically, there was the Hamdard Library, which is actually quite far away, but it's quite nice. I went there when I was interning at the Citizens Archive of Pakistan, but when I called them, they didn't seem very interested, so I was like, okay, we're getting our stuff from other places, so I can let it go. There was also the Sayyid Hashmi Library that's in Malir, so I did a story on that library for Dawn, and I went back there. They didn't have what we were looking for, but I mean, it was a really nice library. It has a really fantastic collection. Other than that, I think the one thing we really struggled with when we were looking at archives was people's personal archives. So we got really lucky with our photos that we found for Shehnaz Gul by the way that, yeah. So that's actually from the archives, right? Here's the copy of the book. This is, it'll be here soon, guys.
At some point I was going to ask about the cover and where that came from. But.
So Sabha actually interviewed Zahid Hussain, who's a photographer, and he had some high-res photos of Shehnaz. Otherwise, all the photos we have of Shehnaz are actually from the archives. So the print quality of those is actually not that great. And that was a problem for us because every time we'd interview someone, they'd be like, oh, she was the most beautiful woman in the room. There was no one more beautiful than her in the 70s. And we were just not getting that from what we saw in print. But when we actually saw the high-res photos, you were like, oh my God, she is actually quite beautiful. So I think there was that, because every time we'd ask someone if they would like to share photos or, and we were very we'll give them back to you, of course. They weren't very forthcoming because I guess there isn't much cultural understanding how archives actually can help research. It's the same thing what I feel when I go to newspaper archives. People don't see the value in archives, which makes me sad because I mean, it's really great. I've been going to the Dawn Library since I was 5 to look up the day I was born to see what the headline was. So, they're important, guys.
Yeah, and I think that point about the value and importance of archives, that's what we've been trying to underscore today, and kind of hope that we can help to support or inspire in others as well. So I said we're going to talk a little bit about the creative use of archives, and I just wondered, this was Hira's question, really. Okay, so this was really Hira's question, but that question of how you have what you have in the archives, but then how do you fill the gaps, and how do you do that? This is linked to another question. Ethically, or with a sense of kind of responsibility to those people that you're writing about. So, or what do you do about the gaps?
So this is actually a really great question, and I think Sabha and I did struggle with that when we were trying to write about Shehnaz, because Shehnaz, for those people who don't know, was Mustafa's married girlfriend who was in the room, in the flat with him.
When he was found dead.
When he was found dead. She was a minor socialite, and people knew her. She was popular, but no one wanted to talk about her. So whatever we got was very, very basic facts and information. So we really had to dig into the archives, read about, like, someone once told us a small bit of information about she had 2 daughters. Okay, that we built it from there, like what was she like. And it took us a long time to actually understand her character and like what we want to show. And I think we've done a decent job in trying to portray what we've learned. But I mean, it was very difficult because with Mustafa, everyone knew him and everyone had a certain perspective of him. With Shahnaz, because I think one of the things that we learned about her character is no one really knew her. Because also
she was an elusive figure.
Yeah, she was. But back to your question, I think it's more interviews, asking around more, because there is someone who will say something, maybe off the record, but then you also have to use your own judgment. Because there weren't a lot of people who said very nice things about her, which obviously after I think the first 2-3 interviews, we realized is not the truth. So like we talked more, we asked around more.
Can you give examples of the not nice things?
Sure. Someone once said to us in an interview that she was an air hostess. And it took Sabah and me literally 3 hours after the interview to be like, oh, that's his way of saying she wasn't a good woman. This is where our idea of the whole buri aurat. Yeah, like it's this whole thing that comes about, right? Like, वो बहुत बुरी औरत थी क्योंकि वो ऐसी थी, वो ऐसे लोगों में बैठती थी. Her husband was so much older than her. She slept around. I mean, like, look, everyone's complicated, and I think that's the thing that we've come across, like, talked about in the book as well. They were both complicated characters, right? As we all are, like, no one's black and white. But another funny thing that someone said to us was how she was pregnant with her first child, and she wanted to name her daughter Shahnaz, but when
like
she was
Shahnaz
born...
Jr., essentially.
Not well, yeah, essentially. But when she was born and like people in the family found out that she was going to name her daughter, and this woman, by the way, is in Lahore, so she's not even in Karachi. And when her daughter was born and they found out that, you know, acha beti ka naam Shahnaz rakha hai, her husband's aunt called her from Karachi and said, "Ye buri auraton ka naam hota hai. You can't name your daughter Shahnaz. Like, look at what's happening. You cannot do that." And we were just like, what? So it's really fascinating. Like, even that the fact that years later, if there's any political scandal or anything, it's always like, oh, look, there's another Shahnaz.
I'm just wondering, we're going to ask the audience if they've got any questions for you in a minute. But I'm just wondering about how you crafted the book then. You had this material, you'd had the podcast, which was a sort of dialogue that brought out the case in various ways. So how then, did you have a model for it? How did you approach it? I mean, I'm conscious of, you know, having recently read Sanam Meher's book on Kandil Baloch, which takes a very kind of sideways look often at trying to write the life of someone who everyone thought they knew but no one really can know. So what was your approach to, and also it's co-written.
Yeah. So for the podcast, I think we had it all mapped out very easily because we wanted to keep the suspense. So there are 2 seasons of the podcast, and it's literally like one of our episodes is called TikTok. So it's literally just build up from that day to what happened, the case, and then the second season is actually just the case. So basically, the prime suspect in Mustafa's murder was, of course, Shahnaz. Surprise, surprise. And then for the book, we've followed that. I mean, you'll get to know more once you read it. But it was an interesting experience because I think writing the book, we played at our strengths, and I mean, I don't think I could have done it with anyone except for Sabah, because she is so organized, like the way she writes and everything and putting thoughts together. I think when we started writing, the one thing we were trying to figure out is the tone. And that was really difficult, but I mean, Saba's fantastic. So it happened.
I think we're all looking forward to reading it. So,
thank you.
when will it be available?
It should be available here end of the year.
And is it Liberty? No.
I can't say.
Okay.
As yet. You'll find out.
Okay. All right. Well, watch this space, I think. So thank you so much for coming to talk to us. And I just wanted to ask if anyone has any remaining comments or questions. I know people will be tired. Nilof is there. Okay.
Thank you, Tuba. I'm really looking forward to reading the book because I do remember the case of this poet and, of course, the lady. Two questions. One, as a writer, how difficult is co-writing? Because actually a book kind of gestates in the mind of the writer. And if two people are simultaneously thinking of a plot, how does that evolve, and how do you negotiate that kind of creative impulse? That's one question. Second one is to do with a little bit of an ethical issue. Shahnaz had two daughters, and probably they're out there, young women now, maybe much older. So a book like this eventually impacts a family and a woman, a child, however old they may be. They may be grandmothers today, but when it comes out, because I've seen this happen in other books and other serials and things, that it kind of reliving a tragedy and reliving aspects of it that you want to forget. So, I mean, these are two questions that came to my mind.
Sure. So, Mustafa's daughter is also still alive, by the way. His son passed away. For Mustafa's part, or the research that we did, we were actually in touch with his niece, who helped us with everything, and his family is aware that we are writing this. The same with Shahnaz. Her daughters are aware that we are writing this, and we'd asked them if they'd like to be interviewed. The podcast was there, so they know that this is happening. Obviously, we could not have proceeded with it without letting them know. And I think, I mean, I can't say for anyone else, but for Sabah and me, this is something that we have been living and breathing for the last 5 years. So it's not just one conversation that we've had. And I also look at it at a very personal level, because when my father passed away, there was a lot of news on it. It was covered a lot, and I obviously think about, if someone had done this to me, how would I feel about it? So I think keeping that in mind, and when we were writing it, we took a very sensitive approach. Obviously, it will hurt. It will bring back memories you want to forget, but it's also a story that I think it's very important to tell, because I mean, a lot of people might not see it, but Shahnaz is the Pakistani woman, right? When a lot of people look back and they do think about, but they're women like that. Sure, they remember women like Fatma Jinnah, but every time they think of a vamp or someone evil, Shahnaz is the first woman they think of, and she's actually not. And in our 5 years of research, I think Sabah and I have come to terms with the characters as well. Because when we started off, we had a very different perspective to what we have now. And to answer your first question, I think the daily discussions we had on what happened that night, what was this, what was that, Sabah and I essentially became one person. And I mean, you can ask my husband there, who every night before going to bed would get a rundown of, we think this happened. So we were very much on the same page. There were times when we were like, no, this is what happened, and she'd be like, this is what happened. But we'd find loopholes in each other's theories. And in the end, as you'd read in the book, we actually have the same conclusion. So co-writing is very much about working together. I'll give you a small example. We went looking for the house the body was found in, and we were literally two random women walking around our neighborhood. Sabah was in a sari, I was wearing I don't know what, but we were just like two women running around, and I was ringing doorbells and asking random people to let me into their house. They obviously did not, because they thought there was some chori chakari karne aa gaye. randomly हम लोग walk करते हुए गए. There was this gate, there was bougainvillea and everything, and I told Sabha, I was like, this is a house. She did not buy that. So she's like, nahi hai, nahi hai, nahi hai. How can you be so sure? I was like, I'm telling you, I just had this gut feeling that this was a house. She put it down on Google Maps as a pin. And for the rest of the week, we came back to that neighborhood. We were looking around for this house. We're looking around. And we're like, okay, we need to do something else. And this is peak monsoon season, so it's also raining. We're like, let's take a break and come back. So we went back and we were like, let's try a different approach. Let's go to the dhobi or the real estate guy in the area. They didn't help us, obviously, because they thought we were crazy. Then this mechanic goes like, what are you looking for? And we're like, we're actually looking for this house. And he's like, okay, wait a sec. He goes into his shop and he gets his hand-drawn map that his father had made of all his clients in the area. And you know what? The house was there. So we took a picture of that. We walked back. It was the house I saw on the first day. So that is, I mean, there are so many ghostly interventions here that Sabah and I have had no choice but to be on the same page. Because Mustafa's ghost clearly just brings us together at every step of the way. Same thing happened to us in the graveyard. We couldn't find his grave. This random rickshaw comes by. Imagine two girls walking around Khorasan Bagh, jumping over graves. And he's like, where do you want to go? And we're like, Mustafa's grave. He's like, I'll take you. He actually took us to the grave. So, I mean, it's been so strange that I think we just melded into one. So, yeah. Sorry, guys, I didn't mean to creep you out. There are way, way more ghostly interventions in this book.
It also does speak to a conversation we've been having about the need to bring back maps in order to find locations and that frustration of the pin drop, you know. Any other questions or comments? Okay, in which case, Mary.
I actually don't remember that right now. Sorry, what's the question?
Can we repeat the question?
I saw that paper so many times. I do know I was born on a Tuesday. That's all I remember right now.
Can you repeat that?
Sure. For me personally, my father was, when he died in what they call mysterious circumstances. So when that happened, a friend of his told me that my dad used to really love Mustafa Zaid's poetry and you should look into his case. So obviously, because I'm a journalist, I got really intrigued and I was like, what happened? And I wanted to know more. So that's how I started into this. Sabah had come across this earlier when we used to work together in the archives, because this is Pakistan's first sex scandal, which is how it was reported in AP. So when we met later, we were looking at other archives. We came across the story again, so we were like, let's start researching on this. That's how it started.
Okay, so thank you everyone for sticking with us for several hours. Really appreciate your presence and do keep in touch. So, and thank you again particularly to Nilofer for particularly making this happen here, as well as Merish, of course. Okay, and the researchers and everyone. Okay, thank you.
Thank you everyone for today's session. We really appreciate your participation and a very patient audience. Apologies once again for all the electrical glitches that took place. I'd like to thank the speaker, Dr. 𝐋𝐈𝐻𝐶, Dr. Madeline Clements, and the participating researchers, Hira Azmat, Mahanoor Jalal, Tazeen Hussain, and Veera Rustam ji, and the author Tuba Masood Khan, and all the workshop participants. I would also like to thank Mr. Hidayatullah, who is the director of Sambara Art Gallery, and his team for their support for hosting us today and for the last 2 days. Mr. Yunus for his tech support. To the energetic team of KB24, Yumna, Hamda, Adan, Adil, Atif, Binish, Ever, Vanessa, Asar, Anna, Saeed Saab, who's not here today, A very big thank you, and I'd also like to thank our Managing Trustee and CEO Nilofer Farooq for putting together a very interesting and very successful discursive session. Thank you very much. Take care. Please go and see all the venues. If you haven't been to all the venues, or the 5 venues, the activities are taking place. You can go to Frey Hall. Of course, those who have not seen Sambar Art Gallery is open. You can see it right now. You can go to Alliance Francaise tomorrow. And of course, Bagh Ibn Qasim is open. So these are the places that I definitely recommend कि आप जाके देखें. And of course, NED, the city campus. Thank you very much.